Don't drink that.
What was in the glass?
Everyone in that building knew which room not to enter. Nobody told me. But that is not where I want to start. I want to start with the night half the city went quiet. Black tie, crystal, 3 cameras on tripods along the east wall, because the Vale Foundation Gala is the one night a year the family lets itself be photographed. Kasimir Vale was standing at the front of the room with the glass in his hand, lifting it, and every person there had their eyes on him. I was the only one looking at the glass. I took it out of his hand, in front of 200 people. I struck it out of the air. It fell. It did not break because I caught it against my palm before it hit the floor. Habit, nothing more. A nurse catches things. And the wine that should have been in his blood by morning ran down my wrist instead. "Hold her!" Elena Castellan's voice, high and certain and triumphant, cutting across that hall like a blade drawn clean. And Kasimir Vale, the most dangerous man in this city, a man who had not bent his neck to anything in 20 years, came down off that dais. Not up, in fury. Down, onto his knees, on the floor, in front of everyone, in a $4,000 suit. And he took my wine-soaked wrist in both of his enormous hands. And in that moment, I did not know whether I had just saved his life or ended my own. Let me go back. 3 weeks. That is all it took. 3 weeks, and one door I was told to walk past. I did not walk past it. My name is Wren Alcott, and I want to be honest with you about who I was when this started, because the version people tell now is flattering, and it is wrong. I was 32 years old, and I was an intern nurse. Those two facts do not usually sit in the same sentence, and every single person in that building noticed. I had a whole life before this one, 10 years of it. I will not bore you with the shape of it, a marriage that ended the way a long illness ends, quietly and with everyone relieved and nobody willing to say so. A job in an office where I was very good at something I did not care about even slightly. A person I became by accident and could not seem to stop being. And then my grandmother died. And I sat in a hospital room at 4 a.m, holding her hand while a nurse named Delia, 26, exhausted, kind in a way that had nothing to do with being nice, did the thing I could not do. She told my grandmother the truth, gently, completely, without one single word of comfort that was also a lie. And I watched my grandmother's face, and my grandmother was not afraid. I went home at 6 a.m, and I did not sleep, and at 9 I filled out an application. Everyone said it was grief. Everyone was extremely comfortable saying it was grief. My mother said it. My ex said it, which took a certain nerve. A woman I had considered a friend said, with her head tilted, that it was very brave to start over at my age. And she said, at my age, the way you'd point out a stain. It was not grief. Grief is what you feel. This was what was left after the feeling burned off. This was the residue. And the residue said, you have 2 hands, and you spent a decade using them for absolutely nothing. So I went back to school. I sold the car. I moved into an apartment with a radiator that sounded like a man being murdered slowly. And 4 years later, at 32, I was placed for my final clinical rotation. They placed me at St. Aurelia, Officially, it is a private clinic. Very quiet, very expensive, very clean. 3 floors, 40 beds, a garden nobody sits in. Unofficially, and I want to be clear that I did not know this on my first day, I found out the way you find out most true things, all at once and too late. Saint Aurelia belongs to the Vale family. Not the way a rich man's name is on a wing. The way a room belongs to the person who owns the building. I did not choose it. You do not choose your placement. You are assigned, the way weather is assigned, and you show up. And here is the word that followed me down every corridor of that place, like a smell I could not wash off. Intern. In school, it meant learning. It meant the future. At St. Aurelia, it meant last to be told, first to be blamed. I was 32 years old and I fetched things. I stocked things. I was handed tasks by 24-year-olds with 2 years on me and no interest whatsoever in the 10 I'd spent elsewhere. Because at St. Aurelia, the 10 years didn't exist. There was no column for them. They fell through. I had made peace with it. Peace is cheaper than pride. And I could not afford pride. Not at 32, not with a student loan the size of a mortgage and a resume that read like 2 people had written it. What I could not make peace with was a wound left to rot behind a closed door because everyone in the building was too frightened to touch it. Because I could smell it, even through the door, even under the bleach and the floor polish and the money. Let me tell you something about my grandmother. She was a nurse too, not the kind you're picturing. She was a nurse in a field hospital in a war I am not going to name, and she came home with hands that shook when she wasn't using them and stopped the second she was. She taught me the smell of a wound that has been dressed wrong and left too long before she taught me to read. That is not a figure of speech. I could identify a failing dressing before I could identify the letter G, and she taught me what that smell means. Not the chemistry of it, the meaning. It means someone is dying slowly enough that the people around them have stopped noticing. So on my 4th day, when Marguerite handed me a tray and pointed down the corridor, I already knew before I got there. Marguerite ran the floor, 58, immaculate, and she had inherited me the way one inherits a draft, with resignation and a plan to seal it up. She put the tray in my hands, clean gauze, sterile saline, a dressing pack. 4th door, she said, left it on the floor outside. Do not knock, do not look in, do not speak if the door opens. Should I wait for, you should put it down and walk away. And then she did something I did not understand for another 2 weeks. She touched my arm. Marguerite had not touched me once in 4 days. She had barely looked at me. And she put her hand on my arm and she held it there for 1 second too long. And she said, quieter, please. Then she was gone down the hall with her clipboard and her spine, and I stood there with a tray in my hands like an idiot. So I walked down the corridor. And I want to be accurate about what happened next, because this is the part people get wrong. They think I was brave. They think I made a decision. I did not make a decision. I saw a number. There was a collection bag hooked outside the 4th door, the kind you hang on a rail when the patient inside will not let you in far enough to do it properly, so somebody has rigged a compromise nobody's proud of. And the collection bag had a graduation scale on the side. And I looked at it, because I have looked at 10,000 of them. Because looking at them is the only thing in my life I have ever been unambiguously good at. 60 milliliters, serosanguinous, trending toward frank, cloudy at the meniscus. I stopped walking. Because 60 milliliters on a wound that is healing is nothing. 60 milliliters on a wound that is 3 days old is a Tuesday. But the tag on the bag had a date on it, and the date was 6 days ago. And nobody had changed it, which meant nobody had touched it, which meant nobody had touched him. And if the output was still that high after however long this had been going on, then that wound was not closing. It was not slow to close. It was refusing. And underneath the bleach, faint, unmistakable, sweet in the way that nothing good is ever sweet, was the smell my grandmother taught me before the letter G. I stood outside that door with a tray in my hands for probably 20 seconds. I want to be honest. I stood there. I am not a saint. I heard Marguerite's voice saying, please. I felt the whole building holding its breath about this one door. And then I thought about my grandmother at 4 a.m, not afraid. And I knocked. Nobody had told me that the 4th door at St. Aurelia was the one door in this city you did not open. Nobody had told me that the man behind it was Kasimir Vale. Nobody had told me he had turned away every surgeon sent to him for 3 years and sent the last one out of that room with 2 broken fingers and a settlement so large it had its own accountant. Nobody had told me he did not permit anyone to see him weak, because a weak baron is a dead baron, and a dead baron is a family without a head, and a family without a head is a war in the streets, and the streets are full of people who have nothing to do with any of it. I knew none of it. I knocked, and when nobody answered, I went in. The room was dark and cold as a cellar, blinds down at 2 p.m. The air conditioning was off. I noticed that. I noticed it immediately, because a room with the AC off in July should have been an oven, and it was not. It was cold, and I did not have a word for that yet. He was not in the bed. He was in a chair by the window with his back to the door, a coat over one shoulder like a man who had been about to leave 3 years ago and simply never had. And he was the largest man I had ever seen. Not tall. I've seen tall. Built like something you'd have to move with equipment. 45 maybe. Gray coming in hard at the temples, and gray in the stubble, and the specific gray in the face that is not age at all, that is 3 years of pain wearing a person down to the load-bearing walls. He did not turn around. You're not Marguerite. No, I agreed. I set the tray down on the table. Marguerite is afraid of you. I don't have the seniority to be afraid of you yet. Give me a week. Now. I did not know he was the Baron. I want that understood because it matters for what comes after. I thought he was somebody's difficult father. I thought he was owed money with a bad temper and a worse insurance policy. Some uncle they kept in a nice room because he was too proud to die politely and too rich to be told so. If I had known, I would still have gone in. But I would not have said that, and he knew it. He did not laugh, but something happened at the corner of his mouth. A flicker, quickly put down, like a man catching himself doing something he'd been told to stop. He had clearly forgotten how. He turned his head, not his body, just enough, and I got the eyes. I have been asked a great many times to describe the first time Kasimir Vale looked at me, and I have never done it well. So I will tell you the truth instead of the good version. He looked at me the way you look at a sound in an empty house. The wound on your shoulder is killing you, I said, because there was no point being delicate about a thing that was filling the room. May I look at it? It was not a question. He noticed that too. His jaw worked. Nobody looks at it. Then nobody has been doing their job. I was already rolling my sleeves. I'm new. I haven't learned yet which jobs I'm allowed to refuse. There is a particular silence a powerful man makes when he has forgotten what it is like to be spoken to, as though he is simply a person with a problem that has a solution. I have come to know that silence very well. That afternoon, it was only a stranger's silence, and I filled it the way I fill every silence, with the practical noise of a nurse at work, cracking the saline, tearing the pack, asking him in the flat voice you use for this to turn toward the light. And here is the thing I have never told anyone. When I peeled back that dressing, and it was exactly as bad as the bag had promised. A 3-year-old entrance wound along the front of the shoulder that should have closed in 6 weeks and had instead been kept open like a mouth that would not stop talking. The edges packed with granulation tissue that had built and broken and built again until the whole thing looked less like an injury and more like a decision. I did not flinch. Not because I am brave, because I was concentrating. Fear is a luxury of people who have the leisure to imagine outcomes. I had a wound in front of me and 2 hands, and the 2 occupy the whole of a person if you let them. He watched me not flinch. And something in that room, something that was not the man, went very still and very attentive. The way an animal goes still when it hears a sound it has been waiting years to hear. I would learn what that stillness was, not soon enough, but I saw the other thing immediately. And I am a little proud of that because nobody else in 3 years has said it out loud. His hand. His right hand was on his left shoulder, not moving, not rubbing, not guarding it the way you guard a thing that hurts. It was pressed flat against the flesh above the dressing, fingers spread, palm down. And it stayed there while I worked around it. And when I said, quietly, "Sir, I need that hand," he moved it. And then, 11 seconds later, without a single flicker of awareness crossing his face, it went back. He was not doing it on purpose. He did not know he was doing it. His hand had been on that shoulder for 3 years, and the man it belonged to had never once caught it in the act. I cleaned it. I packed it. I told him it would have to be opened properly and debrided, and that it would hurt, and that I was not going to lie to him about the hurting. Because people who lie to you about pain cannot be trusted about anything else. He listened. I have thought about that a lot since. He listened. 6 surgeons and 3 years and a broken hand, and the man simply listened. The first time somebody talked to him like a body instead of a throne. When I finished and stood to go, he spoke to my back. "What's your name?" "Wren." "Wren." He said it the way you test the weight of a blade you did not expect to like. "You truly don't know who I am." "You're the man in the 4th room," I said, "who's going to let me back in tomorrow. Because that shoulder is going to feel worse before it feels better. And you're going to want the one nurse who isn't scared of your temper." I paused at the door. "Whoever you are." I found out who he was the next morning when Marguerite saw which corridor I'd come from and dropped an entire drug chart on the floor. She did not pick it up. She stood there in the middle of the hall with 40 pages of somebody's medication history around her ankles, and she said, in a voice I had not heard from her before, "You went in." I went in. You went in and you came out. With all my fingers, I said, which in hindsight was not the moment. The whole clinic knew by noon. The intern, the new one, the old one, because that got said too, and I want you to know it got said, because it is part of the shape of this. The old intern who walked into the Baron's room and walked back out with all her skin. They looked at me in the corridors, the way you look at somebody standing on thin ice who does not appear to know it. And I want to tell you honestly, for about 4 hours, I was terrified. Not of him, of the paperwork, of the placement, of 32 years old and 4 years of loans and one phone call from an administrator ending the only thing I had ever been good at. And then I thought about the bag on the rail. 60 milliliters, 6 days. And I thought, they will take my license for going in that room. And they will not take a single thing from any of the 6 people who let a man rot in it. And I found somewhere around the 4th hour that I had a very low tolerance for that. Nikolai Brandt found me in the parking garage before my shift ended. He was the Baron's second, broad, quiet, a scar through one eyebrow, and the particular weary patience of a man who has spent years managing a grief he is not permitted to name. He did not loom. I want to be fair to him. He could have loomed. He stood about 8 feet away with his hands where I could see them, which I understood later was a courtesy, and which at the time I found faintly annoying. You went into the 4th room. I did. Do you understand what you did? I dressed a wound that 6 surgeons were too frightened to touch, I said, and I'm going back this afternoon to do it again, because that shoulder is going to kill him inside the month if somebody doesn't, and I'd rather it not be the week I arrived. I pulled my gloves off. I looked at him. Is there a reason you'd all prefer he died tidily behind a closed door? Because I've met men like that. I've never understood them. Nikolai looked at me for a long moment. Whatever he had come down there to warn me away from, he set it down. I watched him set it down. It was like watching a man put a suitcase on the ground after a very long walk. He let you back in, he said, half to himself. Sorry? He hasn't let anyone back in since he stopped. And that stop had a shape to it. I have thought about that stop for 6 months. It was not a man losing his sentence. It was a man walking around something. The way you walk around furniture in the dark in a house you know too well. A person-shaped hole. I noticed it, and I filed it away. The way I file away everything I am not yet meant to understand. Since who? I said. Come to the table Friday, Nikolai said instead. The Baron eats there when he's well enough to sit through it. He hasn't been well enough in a long time. If he's well enough Friday, it'll be because of you. A grim flicker at the corner of his mouth. And the table's going to need to see who did it. Is that an invitation or a summons? Yes. He turned to go, and then he stopped, and he said the thing that told me more about the next 3 weeks than anything else anybody said to me. Wear something you don't mind being looked at in. I own 3 dresses. I wore the one that had not been to a funeral. Let me tell you what the Friday table is, because it is not a restaurant exactly. It is a restaurant. It is called Perron's, and it has been on the same corner for 60 years, and on Friday nights, it does not open to the public. The lights stay on, the kitchen runs, the staff work a full service, and nobody comes in, because at 8 o'clock, one long table is laid down the center of the room, and 30 people sit at it, and a not insignificant fraction of this city is decided between the bread and the coffee. There is no ceremony. That is what nobody understands about it. There are no rings kissed. There are no oaths. There is a table, and there are chairs, and where you sit is who you are. And everybody knows exactly where they sit, and nobody has ever been told. I sat at the far end, down by the door, next to a kid named Tomas who poured water and had been doing it for 11 years and would do it for 11 more. The lowest ranked person in the room. And at the head of the table, there was Kasimir's place. And at his right hand, there was a chair, empty. But, and I want you to hold on to this, because everything in this story is in this detail. It was set. A plate, clean, cutlery laid, a water glass filled to the same level as everybody else's, by Tomas, who filled it without looking, the way you do a thing you have done 400 times. Nobody touched it. Nobody looked at it. Which is how I knew that every single person at that table was always looking at it. I did not know whose it was. I would. Kasimir Vale came in on his own feet. I gathered from the faces that this had not happened in weeks. I watched 30 extremely composed people try to hide a jolt behind their glasses and fail, and I understood something about the arithmetic of that room in about 4 seconds. Every one of them had been doing a calculation for 3 years, and the calculation was how long. And tonight, the number had moved, and none of them knew what to do with the movement. He was pale. He moved like a man carrying something heavy and invisible. But he was upright, and his eyes found me at the low end of that table before he had taken 3 steps. That was mistake enough. A Vale does not look for the lowest ranked person in the room. It is not arrogance. It is arithmetic, same as the rest. You look where the danger is, and the danger is never at the door end. But it was not Kasimir who disgraced us both. It was his hand. He sat. Conversation started. The low, dull, weirdly domestic sound of 30 people discussing logistics. Somebody's cousin, somebody's permit, a shipment, a funeral to attend, and how many should go. And Kasimir Vale's right hand came off the table. It did not go to his shoulder. That is what I want you to understand. That hand had lived on that shoulder for 3 years, and for the first time in 3 years it went somewhere else. It went out, down the table, toward the door end, toward me, and it found the back of my chair. I was 6 seats away. 6. He had to lean. In front of 30 people, at his own table, the Baron of the Vale family leaned out of his own chair, hooked his hand over the back of a chair 6 places down, and rested it there, and left it. And the room stopped. Elena Castellan had already half risen. I should describe her. She was the most beautiful woman in that room, and she was 36, and she had been raised, I would learn, for exactly this table since before she could walk. She was the family's consigliere, not the wife of one, not the daughter of one, the thing itself, the mind of the family. She had earned every inch of that chair, and she wore it like a coat that fit. She had half risen because a hand had come down the table, and there was only one place a hand from Kasimir Vale could possibly be going. It did not slow for her. It did not so much as glance off her. It went past. And I sat there at the door end of the Friday table with the Baron's hand on the back of my chair and 30 people staring, and my own hand came up entirely without me and rested on top of it. Because that is what I do. Somebody is holding on. You put your hand on theirs. I have done it in 11 hospital rooms. It is not a decision. It is not romance. It is a reflex you build in the dark at 4 a.m. At the head of the table, Kasimir Vale had gone the color of ash. He opened his mouth. He closed it. For the most dangerous man in this city, he looked in that moment exactly like a man whose dog has done something unforgivable in front of important guests and who has no earthly idea how to explain that the dog is smarter than he is. I don't, he said, and stopped. His voice was not working correctly. "I don't do that."
You seem fairly certain that you do, I said. And down at the low end of the table, Tomas, 11 years of pouring water, 11 years of hearing everything and having no face at all, made the fatal mistake of laughing and could not stop. And then the whole bottom half of that table was shaking with the kind of helpless, hiccuping, eyes-streaming laughter that only escapes when people have been frightened for a very long time and are suddenly, absurdly not. Somebody's fork went on the floor. Nikolai Brandt put his napkin over his face, and I watched his shoulders go. And I want to tell you that I have never in my life seen anything as strange as 30 hardened people laughing at a table where nobody had laughed in 3 years. And Kasimir Vale did not take his hand back. That is the part. He did not take it back. He sat at the head of his own table with his hand on a chair 6 places down, and his face going through 4 separate colors. And he let them laugh, and he did not take it back. And I understood 2 things at once. The first was that I was in more danger than I had ever been in my life. The second was that his hand had known something about me for exactly 1 day, and his mouth had not caught up to it. And I was going to spend a great deal of time watching the distance between the 2. If you want to know what that hand knew and whether I survived what Elena Castellan did about it, because a woman raised her whole life for the head of that table does not lose it quietly to an intern, then stay with me. Follow this one all the way down. The table had already decided how my story went. They were wrong about nearly all of it. So was I. Elena Castellan came to the pharmacy store the next morning. She did not come to threaten me. She was far cleverer than that. She came to warn me, she said, out of kindness, because I clearly did not understand. I want to be honest about Elena, because it would be very easy for me to make her a snake, and it would be a lie. And I have spent 6 months refusing to tell the easy version of this. She was brilliant. She was the best mind in that family by a distance you could measure with instruments. She had held the whole thing together for 3 years while the man at the head of the table sat in a dark room with his hand on his shoulder, and she had done it without ever once being thanked, and without ever once asking to be. She was not a jealous girl. She was a competent, exhausted, grieving woman who had been robbed twice, and I did not know that yet. She came into my storeroom at 7 in the morning, and she drifted along my shelves, touching my jars with one gloved finger, checking for dust that was not there. "You're not the first," she said. I kept counting. His hand has done that before. It's grief, you understand, not a bond. Grief makes a person strange. It attaches to whatever's nearest and warm. She smiled at me. It was a lovely smile. It was made entirely of ice. The last one it attached to, he nearly killed. I stopped counting. Did they tell you that? He doesn't remember doing it. He doesn't know his own strength when the wound is talking. She lived, barely. A pause, precisely weighted. She was very, very good. I would hate for a sweet, brave thing like you to learn that lesson. And she left me with it. And I will admit it, it did exactly what she meant it to do. It sat in my chest like a stone all day. Because it explained the door. It explained 3 years of turned-away surgeons and a room kept dark in July. It explained Marguerite's hand on my arm and her saying, please. It explained a second who could not finish his sentences. It explained the broken fingers. It explained why a man would rather rot than be touched. I got as far as 5 o'clock believing it. And then I was standing at the sink in the staff room washing my hands, and I looked up and I thought about the angle. Because if a hand that size, if that had gone for a surgeon, on purpose, in a fury, that surgeon would not have walked out with 2 broken fingers. That surgeon would not have walked out. 2 broken fingers is not an attack. 2 broken fingers is a man grabbing a wrist to stop it and holding on too hard because he is in the worst pain of his life, and somebody's hand is inside his shoulder, and he has 3 seconds to make a decision, and he makes the smallest one available to him. 2 broken fingers is restraint. And I stood at that sink with the water running, and I understood all at once, the way I understand most true things, that everybody who had warned me which door not to open had been telling me the wrong story. They thought the danger was that he would hurt me. They had it exactly backwards. The danger was that he would rather die than risk it. And in 3 years, nobody had loved him enough or been foolish enough to call that what it is. Cowardice dressed up as protection. I have a very low tolerance for that. I discovered that about myself that day, standing at a sink at 32 years old with the water running. So I went back to the 4th room, and I opened that shoulder properly, the way it should have been opened 3 years ago. Local anesthetic, a probe, no imaging because Kasimir Vale does not sit still for imaging and no radiographer in this city was going to insist. Just me and a probe and a wound that had been arguing with the world for 3 years. It was as bad as I had promised him it would be. His whole body locked, not a sound. He would not give me a sound. I have never met anybody so committed to not giving somebody a sound. And his jaw was so tight, I was genuinely more worried about his teeth than his shoulder for about 90 seconds. And then the room went cold. Not chilly. Cold the way a grave is cold. The AC was off. It had been off for 3 years. It was July. There was condensation on the inside of the window in the middle of a July afternoon, and the air went thick, like breathing through wet wool, and I felt it come up through the floor and into my knees. Now, I am a nurse. Let me be clinical with you for one moment because I owe you that. There is a physiological answer for this. Vasovagal response. Massive adrenergic dump. A body in that much pain will do extraordinary things to a room's apparent temperature, and a brain in that much fear will do the rest. I have felt rooms go cold before. I have felt rooms go cold in oncology at 3 in the morning, and there was nothing in them but a family. I know the answer. My grandmother had a different word for it. She said, some wounds are not only in the flesh. Grief that is refused long enough stops being a feeling and starts being a weather. And it will do to anything that won't get out of its way exactly what any storm does. And Kasimir's eyes rolled to me, gold and enormous and afraid. Not of the pain, of me being near it. Get back, he said, and his voice had something in it, doubled, wrong, like 2 people saying it with one throat. Wren, get back. It always, I can't. No, I said. The cold crept across the floor toward my knees. I did not move my hands. Your hand isn't going to hurt me, I said, through teeth that wanted to chatter.
It has been trying to get me into this room for 3 years, and it finally managed it. It is not going to waste that. You don't know what it did. I know what it did. The cold was in my bones now, a deep ache like winter arriving early on the inside of me. I kept my hands exactly where they were. It kept you alive. That's what a hand does. And then I said the thing I had not planned to say. The thing I understood only as it was coming out of my mouth. And this wound, Kasimir, look at me. Look at me. This wound is not infected. I lied to you the first night, or I was wrong, one of the two. It's clean. It has been clean for a long time. You won't let it close. That's what I've been fighting. Not rot, not sepsis. Your own hand, holding the edges open. I stopped, because I had felt it. The probe found something that was not tissue, and I brought it out into the light. It was small, deformed, copper-jacketed, mushroomed at the tip, worn smooth on one side the way a stone in a river goes smooth. A bullet. A bullet, 3 years in a man's shoulder, and every surgeon in this city had known it was in there, and not one of them had ever been allowed to touch it. But that is not what stopped my heart. It was the caliber. I was holding a 9mm. And I want you to understand, I did not know one single thing about guns. I still don't. I have never held one. I could not tell you how one comes apart. But I knew this, because everybody in this city knew this, because it was on the news for 3 weeks and in the papers for 3 months, and in people's mouths for 3 years. The men who came for Kasimir Vale that night on the roof were carrying .45s. Every one of them. It was in every report. It was the detail that made the story a story. The caliber, the coldness of it, the professionalism. This bullet did not come from them. This bullet came from inside. And I knelt there on that cold floor, holding 9mm of copper in a pair of forceps, and everything I had been carrying for 3 weeks fell into place at once. Nikolai's stopped sentence, and the person-shaped hole in it. The chair at the right hand, the plate, the cutlery, the water glass filled to the same level as everybody else's. Who fired this? The Baron of the Vale family, the most dangerous man in this city, a man who had not asked anybody for anything in 20 years, turned his face to the wall so I would not see it break, and said one word, Mateo, his brother. I did not need to be told the rest, but he told me anyway. That is the thing. He told me anyway, into a wall, in a dark room, in a voice I had to lean in to hear, and I do not think he had said a word of it out loud in 3 years. A roof. A meeting that was a trap. Kasimir standing in the open for 4 seconds too long, because he was a proud man, and proud men stand in the open. And Mateo, 29 years old, the younger one, the funny one, the one who was going to leave all this eventually, and everybody knew it, and nobody said it. Mateo saw the shape on the far roof, and Mateo had a second, maybe less, not enough to shout. Shouting takes a second and a half, and then the man has to hear it, and then the man has to move, and that is 3 seconds, and there were not 3 seconds. So he shot his brother in the shoulder, to put him down,
because a falling man cannot be hit. Kasimir went down. Mateo did not. Mateo stayed standing exactly where his brother had been standing, for 2 more seconds. Because 2 more seconds was what it took. And the 45 took what it had come for. Kasimir Vale is alive because his brother shot him. And the thing that has been sitting in that shoulder for 3 years is the last thing Mateo ever gave him. And his hand, a hand that loves with an animal's absolute, illiterate refusal to accept a loss. His hand had decided that if the wound closed, the last of Mateo closed with it. So it held the door of his own body open for 3 years, bleeding rather than forget. That was the moment everything in me that had been careful went quiet, and something much harder took its place. Because you cannot fix that with gauze and saline. And I was not going to leave it. I understood, kneeling in the cold, with my hands full of a grief that had learned how to bleed. That I had walked through the one door in this city nobody else would open. And I was not walking back out and leaving him alone in there. I did not decide it. It was already decided. The way his hand had already decided about me. Then we don't close it yet, I said. My voice had changed. I heard it change. We keep it open on purpose, together, where I can see it, instead of you keeping it open in secret in the dark until it kills you. You don't get to grieve him by dying slowly in a locked room, Kasimir. That's not honoring him. That's just making the family bury 2 of you. The cold stopped crawling. Mateo held you up with a bullet, I said. Fine. Then I'll hold it. But you have to let me in the room. And his hand, the hand that had not left that shoulder in 3 years, came off it and found my wrist and stayed. Warm, enormous, not gripping, just there. The way you put a hand on a rail. And the cold went out of that room all at once, like a door had been shut on it. And behind me, in that chair, the Baron of the Vale family wept the way a man weeps who has not permitted himself to in 3 years. Silently, enormously, ashamed and completely unable to stop. I did not turn around. Some things you give a person by not watching them. I gave it a minute. Then I said to the wall, because he needed something to answer that was not the size of what had just happened. There's a second plate at your table. Everybody pretends not to see it. It's his. I know. I finished the dressing. My hands had never stopped. That is the whole trick if anybody ever asks you. Your hands do not stop. You should fill it sometime. An empty plate says he's gone. A full one says he was here. I sat back on my heels. My knees were screaming. Grief and pride wear the same coat in my experience. It's very hard to tell them apart in a dark room. Easier in the light. He did not answer for a long time. When he did, his voice had come back to itself, roughened but his. Nobody speaks to me the way you do. That's their loss and your bad luck, I said, and stood up. My knees ached from the cold. My hands ached from the work. And I felt more like myself than I had in 10 years. I'll come tomorrow. Fill the plate tonight.
That's not a nurse's order. It's just advice you're free to ignore, like all the good advice I have ever given anybody. And the corner of his mouth did the thing it had forgotten how to do. This time it remembered all the way. What followed over the next 2 weeks was the most ridiculous courtship in the history of the Vale family. And I was only half a participant in it, because the other party was not a man. Kasimir Vale did not court me. He did not know how. I am fairly sure he had never done it in his life. He was 46 years old, and every woman who had ever come near him had come near him because of what he was, and he knew it. And he had made his peace with it in the ugly way men make peace with things like that. And beyond that, I do not think he believed he was allowed to. A man that far down in it, a man who had decided in a locked room that the correct amount of life for him to have was none. But his hand had no such scruples, and his hand, I regret to report, was an absolute menace. It started with my pen. My pen, the cheap one, the one every nurse has 4 of and loses 6 of, the one with the chewed cap because I chew them, which is disgusting, and I know. It turned up in his jacket pocket. He found it during a meeting, in front of Nikolai. He put his hand in his own pocket looking for a lighter and came out with a chewed biro with a rubber duck on the clip, because Tomas had given me a pack of them as a joke, and Kasimir Vale looked at it in his own hand with an expression of such total, cornered horror that Nikolai had to leave the room. He had to leave the room. A grown man. He got up and walked out, and I could hear him laughing in the corridor. Kasimir put the pen on the table. This is not mine. No, I agreed. I don't know how that got there. No, I agreed. He kept it, by the way. I checked. 6 weeks later. It's in his desk drawer. It is the only thing in the drawer. Then it was the threshold. I had a bunk room at St. Aurelia for nights. 3rd floor, end of the corridor, a bed and a locker and a window that faced a wall. And he started sitting outside it. Not doing anything, not knocking, not saying anything. There is a bench in that corridor, put there for people waiting on bad news. And the Baron of the Vale family would come up 3 floors and sit on it at 2 in the morning with his elbows on his knees, doing nothing for 3 hours, and then go. Every morning I would open my door and step over 200 pounds of him, and every morning he would rise, rigid with dignity, and inform me that it would not be happening again. And every night it happened again. I asked him once, only once, I said, "What are you doing out here?" And he looked at that wall for a long moment, and he said, "The last time somebody was in a room I couldn't see into, they didn't come out." And then he was appalled at himself for saying it, and got up and left, and came back the next night. And then there was the meeting. Oh, the meeting. All 5 families, a closed room, 60 years of history in there, and a table, and on that table a map, and a genuinely serious conversation happening about a genuinely serious thing. And I was there because I go where the shoulder goes. That is my job. I sat at the back with a bag and a chart and a very neutral expression, and Kasimir Vale's hand, in front of every capo in this city, with no instruction whatsoever from the man it is attached to, picked up the only object on that table that was not a document. A clementine. A clementine. Somebody had left it there, God knows why. God knows where it came from in the middle of a closed session about territory. And that hand carried it the entire length of that table, past the map, past every one of them, and set it down in front of my chair.
and then sat back and looked at its own owner with an expression of frank, open expectation. Where had he even found a clementine?
Kasimir put his face in his hand and did not speak for the rest of the session. The head of the Castellan family looked at me, looked at the clementine, looked at Kasimir, and said, very carefully, "Shall we continue?" I laughed until I cried in the storeroom afterwards. Marguerite came in to find out what was wrong with me, and I could not explain it, and I still cannot, and I am laughing now. It is a very particular joy, being chosen that badly by something that cannot help itself, while the man it belongs to stands 3 feet away, going quietly out of his mind. Because that was the tension of it, and it was better than any nearness could have been. He stood 3 feet away when one would have done. He handed me a file across the whole width of a table when he could have put it in my hand. He held my eyes across a room until the holding said everything there was to say, and then broke it, deliberately. Always him, always first, every single time. Because he had decided he did not have the right. And his hand had decided he was an idiot. 2 weeks, 14 days. And in 14 days, that man touched me exactly twice, both times by accident, both times pulling back like he put his palm on a stove. And I want to tell you something. At 32 years old, from the far side of a decade of a marriage where somebody touched me every day and never once looked at me, I would take the 3 feet. Every time. I would take the 3 feet and the look across the room and a man who breaks it first because he does not think he has earned it. Over 10 years of a hand on my back that meant nothing at all. And the second plate, from that second night onward, was full. I noticed. I did not remark on it. Some things you give a person by not watching them. Nikolai found me in the garage again a week on. He looked younger. It frightened me a little, honestly. How much lighter a man can look when a grief he has been guarding alone finally has help carrying it. "Whatever you're doing," he said, "don't stop." "I'm not doing anything," I said. I was just the only one who didn't know which door to avoid. "No," he shook his head, slowly. "Everybody knew which door to avoid. You're the only one who decided the man behind it was worth the risk. There's a difference." He looked at me steadily, and I have thought since that this was the closest anybody came to telling me straight. There are people who've noticed that too, and they are not glad of it. He meant Elena. I knew he meant Elena. What I did not know yet, what I could not have known, because I had been at that table for 3 weeks and she had been at it for 15 years, was how far a woman raised her whole life for the head of that table will go when it walks past her outstretched hand for the second time. The second time. I did not hear it. It was right there in front of me, and I did not hear it. Elena Castellan had been engaged to Matteo. She was going to marry the younger brother. In 4 months. The dress was bought, and then a roof, and a 45, and a family that needed a mind more than it needed a widow. So she put the dress away and picked up the work and did it for 3 years without one single person ever asking her how she was. She had lost him too, and nobody had ever once said his name to her out loud. The Vale Foundation Gala is a real thing, and I want you to understand how it works, because Elena did, and I did not, And that is the whole difference between us that night. It funds St. Aurelia, genuinely. Every bed in that building, every machine, every one of Marguerite's nurses, paid for out of a foundation with a Vale name on it and clean money in it. That is not a laundering joke. That is the actual arrangement, and it has kept a clinic open in a part of this city that would otherwise have nothing at all for 19 years. Once a year, they put on a room, and the city comes, and the family stands up in the light and is photographed. It had not been held in 3 years, because you cannot hold a gala without a baron, and the baron had been in a dark room with his hand on his shoulder. And now he could stand. So the invitations went out. And I want to be honest about the vanity of it, because I felt it, and I am not going to pretend I didn't. I knew that room was happening because of me. Nobody said it. Nikolai looked at me once across a hallway and did not say it very loudly. I had done that. 32 years old, 4 years of loans, a chewed pen. I had put a man back on his feet, and the light in that room was on because of it. I stood at the far end, by the doors, because I was still an intern, still the lowest ranked person in the room, and I had no expectation of being named at all. Elena Castellan had other plans. She rose before Kasimir could speak. It was a breach of every custom in that family. There is an order to it. He speaks, then the family, then the guests. She rose first, and she made it look like grace. She had a glass in her hand, crystal, something old and beautiful with a family's initials cut into it, and she held it up, and she spoke in a voice pitched exactly to the farthest wall. A gift for our Baron, to his health, to his recovery, and to the nurse who restored it. The word came out of her like a splinter. Let him drink to her in front of all of us, and settle the question this entire room has been asking. It was beautifully done. I want to say that. 6 months on, I still admire it the way you admire a bridge, because to refuse was an insult to the Castellan family in front of 3 cameras. To make me drink instead was beneath the dignity of the moment. So of course he would drink. The Baron, graciously, to end an awkward scene. And not one of us would spend a single second thinking about the fact that Elena Castellan's grandmother had been the most gifted apothecary in 3 counties. And that a thing like that runs in the blood. I knew. I do not entirely know how I knew. A nurse knows the smell of most of the things that kill people. That is not mysticism. That is a drug cupboard and 4 years and a woman who made me memorize a list with a ruler across my knuckles when I was 7 years old because she had watched people die of the wrong thing in the right dose, and she was not going to have a granddaughter who could not tell. And under the champagne and the lemon peel, there was the faintest ghost of something bitter. Digoxin. Concentrated. Enough to stop a heart and be called a bad night's sleep by morning. Enough that a man of 46 with 3 years of chronic inflammation and a cardiac history nobody had ever properly worked up would simply not wake up. And every doctor in this city would sign it, happily, with relief even. The glass went up the room, hand to hand, the way a thing like that does, toward Kasimir, who was already reaching for it, with the easy courtesy of a man ending an awkward scene. Now, I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not shout. Shouting would have been the end of me. The intern nurse, 32, a placement, no family, no name, no standing, accusing a Castellan on a feeling in front of the whole city and 3 cameras. They would have called it exactly what she needed them to call it. Jealousy. Ambition. A woman who got above herself. She had built the trap so that any noise I made snapped it shut on my own throat. So I did not make a noise. I walked. I walked the entire length of that room, past the families, past the cameras, past every person in this city who mattered and half the ones who did not. The same way a hand had once come down a table toward me, and I reached him exactly as the glass reached his hand. And I did the only thing that cannot be argued with. I took it out of his hand, and I struck it out of the air. It fell. I caught it against my palm before it hit the floor. I don't know why. Habit. A nurse catches things. And the poison ran down my wrist instead of into his blood. And the room erupted. "Hold her!" Elena Castellan's voice, above all of it. High, certain, triumphant. Because I had just handed her the ending she wanted. "She struck the glass from the Baron's own hand. She cannot bear to see him honored. Hold her!" And that is where the night I began with begins. Because Kasimir Vale came down off that dais. Not up, down. Onto his knees, on the floor, in front of all of them. And he took my wine-soaked wrist in both of his enormous hands, and he did not look at Elena. He did not look at his men. He looked only at me. What was in the glass? Quietly, just for me, but his hand said it to the entire room. Because that hand, the hand that had lived on a shoulder for 3 years, the hand that had been holding a dead brother's last gift open in the dark, the hand that had spent 2 weeks embarrassing him with pens and clementines, came off my wrist and rose and pointed at Elena Castellan. And stayed there, not shaking. And the whole city watched the Baron of the Vale family let his own hand name the threat in that room. And the threat was not the nurse. "Digoxin," I said. My voice did not shake. I was proud of that later. Enough to stop a heart and be called a bad night's sleep by morning. Smell it yourself. It's on my skin now instead of in your chest. I lifted my chin. "You're welcome to be angry with me for striking your glass. I'll take the punishment for the discourtesy gladly. But I'd rather be fired for insolence than bury you for manners." The room had gone completely silent. Kasimir lifted my wrist. He smelled the wine. And I watched the Baron of the Vale family understand, in front of his entire city, exactly how close he had come, and exactly who had stepped in front of it, and exactly who had planned it. He rose. He did not let go of my hand. "Elena," he said, and his voice was the one I had heard through the wound, doubled, something under it, and it filled that room to the ceiling. "You will be escorted out tonight. You will be across the county line by dawn. And if you are found inside Vale territory after that, I will answer the question this room has been asking. Do you know what it's been asking?" She did not answer. She had gone the color of ash. I knew that color. I had seen it on him, in a dark room, a lifetime ago. "It's asking," Kasimir said,
how anybody in this room ever thought this woman was the danger in it. And here is the part I did, and I want to tell you about it, because everybody remembers the kiss, and nobody remembers this, and this is the one I am proud of. I said his name, quietly, and I said, "Wait." And I turned around, still holding his hand, and I looked at Elena Castellan, 36 years old, brilliant, ruined, standing in the middle of a room she had held together for 3 years while everybody in it forgot she existed. And I said the only thing that had not been said to her in 3 years. You were going to marry Mateo. And she broke. Not the way you're thinking. She did not weep. Elena Castellan did not weep in front of a room, that night or any other. She just stopped being a thing that was standing there on purpose for about 2 seconds, and then she was again. But I saw it. Nobody said his name to you, I said. Have they? In 3 years. They said it to him, behind a door where they could pretend it wasn't happening, and they gave you the work, and you did it. Elena, you tried to kill him tonight, and I don't forgive you, and I'm not going to, and I'd do the same thing again in a heartbeat. But I know what a grief looks like when it's been refused for 3 years. I've had my hands inside one, and you didn't get a room to do yours in. Nobody gave you a door to close. The silence in that room was a physical object, and Kasimir Vale, who had every right, who had every reason, who had a hand still pointed and a city watching and a code older than either of us, said nothing. He let it stand, and I felt his hand tighten on mine. Once. They took her out through the side. She went on her own feet. She did not look back at him. She looked at me. And I will be honest with you, and I have not told him this. I do not think what was on her face was hatred. I think it was relief. Somebody, finally, had said it out loud. And then he turned. He was still holding my hand, in front of all of them. And he did the thing his hand had been trying to make him do for 2 weeks. The thing his grief had told him he had no right to. He raised my hand to his mouth, and he pressed his lips to my wine-stained knuckles. One breath, no more. The kind of kiss that is a sentence and not a scene. And what broke open in me was not desire, though there was that. Buried under everything, and I am 32 years old, and I am not going to be coy with you about it. It was recognition. The vertiginous, unbelievable recognition of being seen, all the way down, by somebody who had every reason on earth to keep his eyes shut. And choosing, in front of the world that made him what he is, to open them anyway. My hand chose you the first day, he said, low, just for me, though the room heard every word. Without asking me, it was always ahead of me. I have been trying to catch up to it since you walked through a door you had no business opening. His thumb moved once over my knuckles. I'm asking now. Late and badly, and in front of far too many people. Stay. Not as my nurse. Stay. I looked at the Baron kneeling. No, standing. But he had knelt. They all saw him kneel. And I thought about the second plate. Full now.
and the cold that stopped crawling, and a man on a bench in a corridor at 2 in the morning saying, "The last time somebody was in a room I couldn't see into, they didn't come out." And 3 years of bleeding rather than risk one single soul in a dark room. "I told you the first night," I said, "that I hadn't learned yet which jobs I'm allowed to refuse." The whole room leaned in to hear the intern answer the Baron. "I've decided I'm refusing this one. You don't get to be alone in the cold anymore." I let him see me smile. "That's not a nurse's order. It's just advice you're not free to ignore." And Kasimir Vale's hand, with absolutely no instruction from the man it is attached to, settled at the small of my back and stayed there, insufferably pleased with itself. And the great room of the Vale Foundation, which had come out that night to watch an intern fall, watched instead the most dangerous man in this city be caught, at long last, by the one person too new to know she was supposed to be afraid. Now, I know what you want. You want the rest of that night, and you are not getting it, and I will tell you exactly why. Because he drove me home himself. Because he did not know what to do with his hands, and neither did I. Because we sat in a car outside my building with a radiator that sounds like a murder, and neither of us said anything for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. I counted on the dashboard clock. 2 adults, 46 and 32, in a parked car in complete silence, because neither of them could work out how to go first. And then he said, "I don't know how to do this." And I said, "Neither do I. I did it once, and I did it badly, and it took 10 years. And he said, "And this is the one. This is the one I keep. Then we'll be bad at it in the light, where I can see it." Some things you give a person by not watching them. That is all you are getting. The wound closed. And I want to be very clear that it cost something the night it finally knitted. The cold came back one last time, worse than before. The whole room white. My breath in front of me in a private clinic in July. The air gone to stone in my lungs. His hand's grief making its final argument. That to close the wound was to lose the thing that held it. I held on. I put my own palm over the place where his had been for 3 years. And I told his hand, out loud like an idiot, like a woman talking to a room, that a hand does not have to stay pressed against a wound to have held it. That letting go is not the same as forgetting. I do not entirely know whether it understood the words or only my refusal to leave. But the cold melted. The wound sealed under my hand. Silver. Faintly, unmistakably, the shape of a palm. And it stayed that way. So that Kasimir Vale carries the mark of his brother's last decision on his shoulder. Healed instead of open. Remembered instead of bleeding. He touches it sometimes without knowing he does. I never tell him. Some things you give a person by not watching. If you think I threw the bullet away, no. I did not get to decide about the bullet. It was never mine to decide about. I put it in a specimen pot and I gave it to him and I left the room. It sits at the head of the Friday table now, in a small glass beside the second plate. Everybody can see it. Nobody remarks on it. And before every meal, out loud, by name, we drink to Mateo, so that nobody at that table ever again mistakes grief for something you hide behind a closed door. Tomas pours the water, same level as everybody else's. 11 years, he has never once been thanked for it. I thanked him. He cried in the kitchen. Nobody was supposed to see that, and I am telling you anyway, because he is 39 and he has been filling a dead man's glass every Friday for 3 years, and somebody ought to know. 6 months on, I am the head nurse at St. Aurelia, which still strikes me as an administrative error nobody has caught. I have a pharmacy the size of my grandmother's chapel. I have a budget. I have Marguerite, who is 59 now and reports to me, and who was so appalled by that for the first 4 weeks that she made a sound like a kettle every time I walked in. We're fine now. She is the best nurse I have ever worked with. I told her so. She said, obviously, and walked out. And I have an intern of my own, a frightened kid from the east side, 19, hands like a bird. And on his 4th day, I sent him to the 4th door in the west wing with a tray of clean gauze and instructions not to knock. He knocked. Of course he did. I chose him for it. A letter came last week from the teaching hospital where I trained, from the senior nurse there, the one who told me at 30, in front of 4 other people, that I would never rise above soft hands and a soft voice. She'd heard, she wrote, that an intern out of her own program had married a Vale. She did not believe it. Could I confirm the rumor so she could put it to rest? I confirmed it. I did not gloat. Gloating and grace wear the same coat in my experience. It is very hard to tell them apart from a distance. Easier up close, where you can see which one is smiling. Kasimir found me writing the reply at his own table, in the seat at his right hand, which is not empty and never will be again, though there's still a full plate beside it that we do not eat from, because it's Mateo's, and some places you keep set. What are you telling her? He asked, reading over my shoulder in the firelight. His hand, a warm weight on the back of my neck, doing exactly what it wanted, as it has done from the first day. The truth, I said, that nobody told the new nurse which patient to avoid, and that it's the best mistake I never made. So, here is what I want to know from you. Before I close the door on this and let you go, do you think that hand knew what it was doing? That first night, at that table, 6 seats down, do you think it chose me on purpose, sure of a thing it took the rest of us 3 years and a glass of poison to work out? Or was it only grief, reaching for the nearest warm thing, and it got luckier than any of us deserved? Tell me your theory below. I have been living inside the answer for 6 months, and I still cannot decide. And if you want her story to keep going, the kid at the 4th door, the letter that hasn't been answered yet, what Elena Castellan is doing on the other side of that county line, because a mind like that does not stop. And I did not ask him to have her killed, and he did not offer, and neither of us has ever said one word about that conversation we didn't have. Whatever walks the length of that room next, comment the hand and stay with me, because there's always another door in this building that somebody's been told not to open. I've made a habit of opening them. Where are you listening from tonight? Pull up a chair.
There's a plate, and it's full.